Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we are going to discuss about the current budget which has been brought by Arun Jaitley today. To discuss the issue we have with us Professor Surajit Majumdar from JNU. Hello Surajit. So we have seen Modi has been talking about good days. Do you think the good days are coming in this budget?
Well, if the people of this country voted out the UPA in the last elections and in the expectation that they will see better days, then what this budget indicates is that hope would be belied, because what we see in this budget as well as the budget that was placed last year, in July last year by the finance minister, is the continuation of the very same policies that were pursued by the UPA, policies which have resulted in a situation where the benefits of whatever growth has been happening have been cornered by a small segment of society, the corporate sector and small sections of Indian society, and B has resulted in a situation where growth has also kind of slowed down because of the fact that there isn't enough demand in the economy for the products of different sectors. So that is likely to continue, because this particular budget also indicates clearly the continuation of the same policy, reflected in the fact that instead of an approach of generating more tax revenues to increase public expenditure, the thrust has been towards keeping the deficit low and keeping taxes low at the expense of expenditure.
So, but there have been new taxes imposed, say Swach Bharat cess has been imposed by 2% on taxes. Also, the service tax has been increased by 2%, while another corporate tax has been reduced by 5%. So, how do you see it?
Well, we have to look at the question of taxes by taking the sum total effect of the taxes. The sum total effect of the direct tax concessions is to reduce the tax that would have been generated, and if there is any thing of additional revenues, it is coming from indirect taxes, whereas the approach should be to generate more revenues from direct taxes. And if one looks at the actual tax revenue to GDP ratio, that itself is very low, and this is following 4 years of a situation where revenues have actually been falling below the budgeted figures. And what has been happening is that expenditure is being continuously cut in order to keep the deficit low despite the low revenue. So, what was required was significant measures to generate additional revenues so as to be able to expand public expenditures, and that is completely missing. The thrust is on the opposite direction.
So, the government has been continuously talking about increasing the employment opportunities not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. We have seen that there is no increase in funds for NREGA. Government is saying if it will be able to procure funds, so it will increase it by 5,000 crore rupees. Also, there has been no increase in the funds for food subsidy that needs to be given. So, how do you see it? What path is the government taking in when we consider social sectors or the employment generation or the food subsidy?
Well, as I said very clearly that if your attempt is to keep the expenditure levels low, then naturally the expenditure heads which are more amenable to reduction will get hit. So, the expenditure on NREGA is one expression of that, but if you look at subsidies, social sector expenditure, agriculture and rural development, all expenditures which affect the lives of the common people, they are suffering as a result of this approach of, and this is not just now, it is a continuation of hits that these expenditures have been taking for a succession of years, because even during the UPA's tenure there was this attempt at reducing the fiscal deficit, which has primarily rested on trying to curb the expenditures of the government. So, successively these have been hit, and if you look at the volume of these expenditures relative to India's GDP, they have contracted significantly over the last 4 or 5 years.
We have seen the government has been continuously talking about upliftment of the people from scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. We have seen in the rail budget yesterday that they have introduced this Nirbhaya fund for installing CCTV cameras for gender security in trains. But if we look at the budget today, there has been decline in the funds for SC/STs and also in the gender budget. So, this government is contradicting itself in every move. How do you perceive it?
Well, in this country, every time any policy is taken, no matter who its beneficiary is, the declared beneficiaries are always supposed to be the common people of this country. Now, if that was actually true, then the conditions of the common Indian people would not have been what they are today. We have seen this. So, governments will of course pay lip service to the interests of the common people, to the interests of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women, but when it comes to actual taking policy measures which would make a substantive difference to these people, then you find that governments are often lacking, and the same is reflected even in this particular budget. And the essential point is that as long as you are going to remain committed to keeping expenditures low, this is the only way it will be, because there are some expenditure heads which you can't adjust. It is these expenditure heads which are going to get adversely affected, and the effects on the economy as a whole of, because the economy is also growing slowly, investment is down, depressed. So, if you want to stimulate growth of output and employment in the economy, then too you need expansion of public expenditure. But the emphasis has been on essentially relying on private sector to invest. In the name of that, you keep giving concessions to the private sector. They keep gobbling up those concessions, but they do not necessarily deliver in terms of the benefits that are required for the people of this country.
The government has also said that by the end of this year, they plan to bring down inflation rate to say, I think 5% per annum. So, what do you think, how will they move on this part, bringing down inflation, which is comparatively very high at this moment of the
inflation
year?
Has been very high for a number of years. It has come down a little in recent times, but to a great extent this is because of fortuitous factors like reduction in world oil prices, which has nothing to do with Indian government policy. A second element which is responsible for the decline in inflation is that if you are going to squeeze the capacity of people to buy things, squeeze demand, that also has a depressing effect on prices. So, if you are going to reduce inflation by squeezing the capacity of common people to buy things, then that is not a solution to the problem of inflation. It is a solution which is reproducing the same problem in a different way. So, we have not yet seen any measure which will ensure that inflation in the long run will be contained, along with a situation where there is an expansion of employment and income for ordinary people, which would require investment in things like public infrastructure, in investment in agriculture. All of that has not really been forthcoming. What instead we see is that these expenditures are being slashed so as to ensure that the fiscal deficit is kept under check.
The government is also saying that most of the funds now will reach to the states. So, how is that going to happen?
Well, there is a slight bit of sleight of hand happening in this. Yes, under the arrangements of Indian federalism, the revenues that come to the center are supposed to be shared with the states, and the percentage which is supposed to go to the states is supposed to now increase. But apart from the revenues that used to go to the states, you also had expenditures financed out of central revenues which were meant for the state. So, various centrally sponsored schemes. So, the central government also provided assistance to the states, which used to appear as expenditures of the central government. So, both the revenues as well as the expenditures involve transfers to the states. What you are getting now is that the revenue part is going to increase, whereas the expenditure side is going to get cut. So, if you take both into account, actually the states, what the states are going to get as a percentage of the total GDP will be less than what had been budgeted last year. So, it is actually a false claim that the states are going to have more, and if the revenues fall short as they did last year, then the states will suffer even more, because now bulk of the revenues that receipts that states are going to get from the center are a percentage share of the center's revenues. If they fall short, states will also fall short.
So, lastly, Surajit, when we look, the fund on social service has been reduced and additional corporate tax subsidy has been given to corporates. We look at the background of this entire NDA government since it has come to power. It has been following a very pro-corporate policies, bringing FDI and the latest Land Acquisition Act. So, will it be wrong to say, or will it be right to say that this entire budget and this government is pro-corporate and anti-people?
Of that, I don't think there was ever any doubt. And the corporate sector's backing of this particular government was also played its part in ensuring that it was able to win the elections, because a lot of resources were. So, it is in a sense payback time now. But the victims of that payback will of course be the ordinary people of this country, whose expectations of better days are surely not going to be met.
Thanks for giving us your time. We will be coming back to you on such issues.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Newsclick.